Hey everybody, welcome back. I'm Susan Linder, your host of the Innovation Storyteller Show, where we're here to break the myth about how innovation gets done in the world. It is not just the result of great ideas, great breakthroughs, but rather the stories that we tell alongside those amazing breakthroughs to get other people on board with those incredible ideas. And that's why I'm so excited today to have two amazing innovators on our show from RTI. If you don't know RTI International, it is one of the most esteemed research organizations in the world that is really looking to change our world through the betterment of science, health, public access to the most important pillars of our foundations, really, as human beings in the world. And those opportunities come across through amazing scientists and really thoughtful leaders about how we are trying to improve the human condition every day. And I've had the good fortune of working closely with RTI and with my fantastic colleague there, Shellery Ebron. And I want to introduce you first to Shellery and then to her colleague, Annice Kim, who is joining us as well to talk about some of these breakthroughs and the stories behind them as well. So first, Shellery Ebron is the Senior Director of Corporate Innovation at RTI. She is a strategic leader who combines more than 15 years of expertise overseeing innovation and digital health initiatives to surface, prioritize, and solve mission-driven problems for federal and healthcare clients. With expertise in qualitative and mixed method research, she evaluates projects that use information technology to inform healthcare policy. Shellery connects ideas and cross-functional teams to challenge existing processes and create new value from innovations. She has supported a wide variety of federally funded projects related to electronic health records, community-based interventions, alternative payment models, and medical homes. Shellery puts equity, diversity, and inclusion into action by building engaging communications, ensuring equitable access to innovation resources, and including diverse perspectives in decision-making. Shellery, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Susan.
Well, I'm going to start off with you, and then I'm going to introduce Annice as well. But you and I had the good fortune of working on communications and storytelling around this brand new innovation function at RTI. Tell us a little bit about what was the impetus for starting the centralized innovation function at RTI, and why was it so necessary for a research organization that's been around for 65 plus years, right?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think it is an important one. I will say recently I was at church of all places and this inspiration came to mind. I heard this quote. Ironically, an EPA colleague was speaking that day, but her quote was, "The problem isn't with the seed, but with the soil." And
Mm.
so when I think about innovation at RTI in particular, solve the world's most critical problems, we have no shortage of ideas. We have no shortage of innovators here at RTI. And so it was really about how do we put the right system in place so that those ideas actually can grow and thrive and flourish, and so that we can build more of them and support great innovators like Annice and the teams that she leads. And so that's really at the core of, why we started, was just how do we support innovation in a more systematic and efficient way so that it is a bigger driver of impact and growth here at RTI. Mhm.
Yeah. And I think the other part that fascinated me is really providing the support, right? Creating all of the innovation guardrails that will allow ideas to flow and really achieve their intended outcomes, right? With all the iterating, the trial and error that goes into that, and still shepherding this process through really smart business leaders, technologists, scientists, and active, well, I'd say community leaders in the field to make these breakthrough ideas reach their finish line.
Mhm, mhm.
Yeah. And Annice, I want to introduce you as well to the show. So Annice Kim is the Senior Director of the Center for Communication and Media Impact at RTI International. She leads teams that examine the impact of health risk communications and public health education campaigns for federal, state, and local health agencies. She's passionate about developing novel methods to accelerate public health research and practice to meet the demands of today's modern world. Annice believes that we should embrace new technologies with cautious optimism and build digital fluency as much as a muscle, rather, we exercise daily so we can help shape and design the application of new tools to address the public health challenges of today and tomorrow. Annice, thank you so much for joining today as well.
Thank you, Susan, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, both of you are on the cutting edge of looking at innovation functions inside of the organization, and then stepping out and saying, look at the digital tools that we have available to us, and how can we begin to utilize them to really make these breakthroughs? Well, let's start with, all of us start off with a different definition of where innovation comes from. When you think of innovation, is it about the big idea or is it about the impact? Where does innovation for both of you lie? What is the most critical function here?
I would say for us, by definition, so we define innovation as creating or improving science-based solutions that add new value to RTI or our clients. And so for us, two things are important in that definition: science-based solutions, just by the nature of the work that we do and the reach and the impact that we have, and then creating value. So impact, value, science has to be at the core of innovation for us at RTI. And so I'm going to cheat a little bit. I don't know that I would choose one over the other, Susan. I think all of it is important. That trifecta is important to actually kind of realize the value of innovation here at RTI.
Mm.
I would add that it's a little bit of both, right? I think for folks who are working day to day on projects with clients, when you start to see a pattern of this kind of hairy problem that you keep running up against, but the approach to how that problem's been dealt with so far has its limits, right? And so you have to look up and constantly pay attention to other trends that are happening outside of your work, as well as how other people may be also tackling that problem. And then you get to see the kernels of your individual problem fitting into this larger scope of a big idea or a big transition or a big technological innovation that's happening. But I think people can't really tie it to that until they actually understand the root of the problem and how a solution that is innovative could help them address that problem.
Yeah. And Annice, before this call, you were mentioning at RTI, everybody gets motivated around the problem, right? You kind of see this persnickety problem that keeps popping up, or maybe it's even a new one that crops up. They're like, how do we deal with this? Can you talk a little bit about getting motivated around the problem, and how you begin to first think about these solutions? You mentioned, looking outside of the organization or what's been done historically. What are some of the steps that you take to get motivated around the problem?
Sure. And I think we get motivated around a problem because, as Shellery noted, we're a science-based organization. So we
Right.
have a lot of folks here who, I think scientists by nature are explorers, or they're in search of a discovery, right? Of a new idea or of a new application, of a new method. And so they're kind of curious by nature. And I think that's what allows people to get kind of motivated around a problem to come up with a new solution. In my work, we look at a lot around media and technology. Media is the way all of us communicate, and digital and social media is one of the biggest forces and platforms through which we communicate individually and as a society at large. And so in some of the work that we were doing around really trying to understand how people were using like social media, for example, and digital media, we kept coming across this problem where we couldn't figure out who was who online. And, I think that's by nature could be a good thing, right? We don't know all the details of users online, but when we're trying to understand whether or not a public education campaign that's trying to reach youth to educate them about the dangers of vaping or tobacco use or other drug use, clients need to know, are they reaching their target audience? And so that was a problem we kept coming across. And I had to look outside of the way we were traditionally looking at that problem and look at what were tech companies doing, what were computer scientists and engineers doing outside of the space to really understand whether there were some patterns around how people communicate online. And so one of the things that we found was that there's ways you can predict demographics of certain users by the linguistic patterns of what they post on social media. And so I thought, wow, this could be the beginning of how we try to take some of those methods and bring it to our application. But in order to do that, I needed to reach out to other folks who knew kind of the data science field much more closely than I did. So I brought a team together of data scientists, other folks who do public health research, and we ended up really developing a custom algorithm to predict the use likelihood that a user online is a youth or a young adult. And that allowed us to then look at things like who are Jules' Twitter followers and predict that majority of them were underage. And so that became kind of a big result because up to that point, we didn't really have a lot of insights around who was who online. So that's just an example, Susan, of where you come across a problem and you start to think there has to be somebody else who's looked at this type of problem in a different field, and what can I learn from them and how can we build off of that?
Yeah. So important. I know as a former epidemiologist working in HIV, so, I mean, and this was in the 90s, so much of that information was hidden. And even the desire to help people became really hard because some of that information was very specific, some of it was confidential. And so even just reaching an audience was challenging. Now you have the vastness, like the ocean of the internet to try to find people and to really begin to even ascertain the scope of the problem, much less than hone in on the particular users that you might like to help. And kids are pretty sneaky, right? If you're looking for underage folk, I remember finding out that my stepdaughter had tried vaping because she posted a picture of herself vaping on Instagram. And I found her Finsta, her fake Insta. And so the only way, I mean, it's really layers and layers. I mean, kids are going to hide stuff, right? But for sure. But switching back to the organizational side, for so many of my listeners who have innovation programs internally, connecting the work that you do around frameworks where you can really begin to work on these projects and have an innovation framework to guide people through and to get the collaborative processes. RTI is a very collaborative place. But Shellery, can you talk a little bit about, how a new pilot project, as an example, might become part of the innovation process at RTI when a business unit leader says, we have an idea,
Yeah.
help us through it?
Yeah, so I was actually going to chime in after Annice was done to talk about how we try to make it easier for people like her and her team, those teams to form, if you will. But also, we try to bring forward best practices, methodologies to help people look at the problem through different lenses. So, like Annice mentioned, we are scientists at RTI. We get really motivated by the problem, but maybe there are people who aren't looking outside of our four walls to figure out how others are solving the problem currently. And so design thinking is the methodology that we really want to be foundational to our innovation ecosystem here at RTI. So we're starting to, through our storytelling and through our pilots, really starting to roll out, just starting with the user in mind, if you will. And so typically, people kind of come up with ideas based on the projects that they're working on with their clients, or even people who aren't working on, client-funded projects may just be experiencing a laborious process or whatever the problem may be. And so we have these internal funding mechanisms that fund different types of innovations, and people usually submit ideas to those funding mechanisms. For the past couple of years, I ran the innovation program in one of our business units. And so that particular program was a little more formal. So once people submitted their ideas, we would review. Annice was on the innovation task force with me. We would review and try to just understand, is the problem, what's the pain point, if you will. And if people cannot clearly articulate that, that was usually just an indicator we use that,
Red
maybe
flag.
it's not ready yet.
Yeah.
But once we confirmed that there was a pain point there with the client, we try to bring forward just the 5 whys, if you will, just to help people get to the root of the problem. And then obviously the gold standard is hearing directly from those users, whether they're clients or internal clients, if you will. And so we try to provide people, and we will do more of this, provide people with just more structured questions to ask just through some user insights, if you will. And we use that feedback we encourage people to use that feedback to help refine and hone in their idea. But it all really starts with understanding the problem, the jobs to be done, how painful is that pain point for those clients, and
i.e., how valuable is
yeah,
is it
yeah.
to solve the problem, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So that usually helps kind of mitigate some of the ideas that people just have that may not be valuable or useful yet. I say yet because sometimes people are just ahead of their time. And, we all know that Henry Ford quote about when he, if he'd asked customers what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. So there are some times where you can tell people we're a little bit ahead of the game, but
Yeah.
it all starts with helping people understand the problem. Mhm.
I do remember being an early iPhone user and still lamenting the loss of my keyboard on my
Yeah,
BlackBerry.
yeah,
I just wanted to be able to push down the buttons
yeah. Mhm.
until we got used to it. But so this shift to around the stories that we tell around the innovation, you know, and these the project that you were talking about, the research project of how do we find, underage users of Juul or vaping in general? How do we go and find them? How do we interact them? How do we determine how big a risk this is? That conversation, when data is collected, now becomes story, right? That we're not just saying, well, here are the numbers. We found this many people who are underage, who are active Reddit users or active Twitter users, or et cetera. Therefore, the story that gets created around this is really important in order to drive a particular public health outcome, to drive legal outcomes, not to mention funding and research around the health impacts around those communities. Can you talk a little bit about the story creation around a research project like that?
Sure. I think, Susan, as scientists, when we do a lot of research, we're thinking about the methods, right? And then we're thinking about the reports we're going to write and the papers and journal articles we want to publish. But to me, even in that, it really comes down to that like last 3 sentences of a conclusion, the kind of so what and everything kind of wrapped up together. And so I think that's where you have to start, right? I think that is the why. And we've heard about like, what is your why? You have to know your why. And it's this kind of, like business euphemism that gets kind of put out there all the time. But I think that's really important when it comes to innovation as well. What is the why? Because if you're really crystal clear on that, that is what drives the story in terms of the impact that you have, as well as the story that motivates the people to come together to work on that project. So that's where we start. And I think, what if we were able to do this so we could solve this particular issue? And then as a result of that, we get to have this kind of impact. So that's kind of the kernels of the story that I think I always start with when I'm thinking about a new innovation, because you have to have that story to motivate people, right? Because people no one's going to voluntarily raise their hand to work on a hard problem. Some people do, but majority of the people do not, because there's a natural resistance to trying to solve something that's difficult, and that's going to require a lot more inertia. So I think, I love your podcast because I think it's critically important, because it's not just around the story of the impact, but it's also the story around what is it that you're going to be a part of as a team who's working on this? Because to Shellery's point, every idea doesn't like hit it out of the park and you get results, right? But you're seeding and planting ideas in this rich, fertile soil of this infrastructure Shellery and team are creating. And so you have to have that story really compelling, and so that it drives people to continue to come back and to continue to push forward, because it's not just a slam dunk every single time.
That's right. And as you assess more data, right, and things change along the way, then sometimes the story shifts too. We thought we knew X, but in actuality, we learned Y. And that's hard sometimes too. I want to address this inertia issue because it's one that absolutely every single listener of this podcast has experienced. Is solving big problems requires overcoming lots of inertia. Have you both discovered any opportunities or techniques that you've used to overcome institutional inertia, or, for some of your research subjects, their inertia?
I can chime in on that one. I think Annice's point around getting people to see the end goal and painting the vision for them. What if we're able to put this in place? Then we can do, and just getting them to see what the impact could be 3 years down the road. And I think about your framework, Susan, show them heaven. But you really have to paint a vivid picture or vision for people just to get buy-in initially. And then I will say too, just creating sort of small steps in order to get there. So even within the context of our innovation process, sometimes it can be frustrating for people not to get all of the money that they request at one time, but we try to help people just frame the initial experiment, if you will, so that they can just build momentum, confirm some of their key assumptions, and then build from there. And I will say that we've taken a similar approach with just building the function. We have, of course, the end goal in mind and that long-term vision about innovation really, driving more impact and growth for us. But we have a roadmap, and this is what we will do this year. This is what we're committing to this year. And step by step, brick by brick, we'll put the system in place to get to that longer term vision. So I would say those two things, just vivid vision and picture what the end goal will be, and then just breaking it down into smaller experiments or smaller, projects that will get you to the end goal.
Yeah, I love that too, because so many of folks who have been on the show talk about reputational risk when it comes to innovation, and the innovation function helps you mitigate reputational risk, right? Rather than giving you, here's $1 million, go see if it works.
Yeah.
Right. Is we're mitigating along the way and hopefully learning from each individual step, that in the event that this project is not worth the value, or it's not a big enough problem worth solving right now, based on the data that we have, that we can stop and pivot and say, okay, not this, not now. Let's find the thing that actually does make a difference, rather than going down, a year's worth, 2 years worth of trying and ending up with, reputational risk, money lost, progress. Like, you can't get that time back anymore when you actually have to pivot. Yeah, I think that's so important. Annice, I don't know if you were thinking about something on that front too.
Yeah, I was gonna just chime in. I totally agree with all that. I think the kind of lean canvas approach, it's I think sometimes researchers, and I don't know, maybe in other sectors as well, people think kind of huge long-term investments to figure out whether or not something's going to work. And I'd like to push back and say we just can't afford that anymore, right? Because technology and innovations are changing so rapidly, so we have to be much more nimble. And so
Right.
Shellery and team have, I think, just kind of introduced those concepts to staff across RTI, so that it's very different than I think the way we typically think. We end up trying to really lay out 3 or 5 year projects at a time for clients. And innovations doesn't have to happen on that kind of cycle and duration. So when I see inertia, I think about like, do I still need this person on my team? And is it really about trying to frame the story in a way that's going to make this compelling to this person, right? So if it's a business person, maybe I have to reframe the story around the innovation from a business investment and ROI kind of frame angle. If it's a methods person, I'm going to really go in on like, this is a methodological issue because I know that's what they really value. So I think some of overcoming the inertia is that it's to just accept it. When it comes to innovation, there's going to be inertia. And so how can you tell a compelling story to different individuals that you need at the table to make that happen? And sometimes I think innovation is not for everybody, and that is fine. And so if I get some resistance from some people, I take that note and I keep looking for somebody else who may either challenge the idea. And if I get enough challenges, I might say, oh, Annice, maybe this needs to be put on the bookshelf for a little while longer until you can, flesh it out a little bit more. Or it's just finding the right person who also kind of understands the potential value of that work.
Yeah, I think you really hit on something. I was also a religion major in college, and I was fascinated with how the prophets moved the word around the world before there was Twitter and Instagram, certainly. And their mechanisms was number one, speak in parables, right? Let's use language that allows us to tell a story that the listener can make their own. Right. So it's just like you said, I have to adapt the story to each audience that I'm speaking to. Absolutely. But then how do I also create stories that the listener makes it their own so that they share it with other people in their voice, which, as we know from social media, it's user generated content that actually has more interest than the corporate tagline, right? Than the prophet, him or herself. So if you can get other people telling the story of innovation or the new research, then that's more impactful. So identifying the early adopters, your top 10 apostles, right? Or your 12 apostles or your 40 congregants that the Buddha had with him in the forest, then those individuals become the megaphones for your message in a far more authentic way than if you were telling it on your own. So those pieces, of like, yeah, this isn't that person's not right yet. They're not ripe yet, is what I want to say. It's not that they're not right. They're not ripe yet. And that's maybe because the message shouldn't come from you. It should come from their colleague in the cubicle or the office next to them to say, hey, did you hear about what Annice is doing? It's a pretty cool project. Here's why I love it. As opposed to why you love it. Yeah. So let's take it one step further. I think what I love about RTI is this global impact. I mean, certainly amazing projects here in the United States, everything from technology innovations to, classrooms getting clean drinking water free of lead, all thanks to RTI's projects, even using citizen scientists, right, to collect water samples, things like Taxol, amazing breakthrough, shifts in pharmaceutical products. I mean, RTI has done it all, but you also have a global impact in countries around the world. How do we bring innovation in our research that we're collecting information at the community-based level and really beginning to change things? How does innovation extend beyond the walls of RTI as well?
That's a good question. I would say to one of your earlier points around the storyteller matters, if you will. We've really tried to have, in some way, shape, form, or fashion, innovation champions across the organization who sit within our social sciences research unit or our international development research unit, our lab sciences groups, for example, so that they can tell the story in the language of that business unit, if you will. So that's one approach that we've taken. We also, on a corporate level, partner with our corporate comms team, for example, to really tell the story in a way that's going to resonate with our clients. And so they really understand, again, that the client's language, if you will, and our value proposition for those clients. We have a marketing team who is fantastic, who does the same, who will, coordinate, tech talk webinars, for example, and really try to leverage our channels to get our innovations in front of clients. So there are a number of different approaches that we take, whether it's just based on if it's internal or external. But my favorite is really the grassroots way that you mentioned, having the innovation champion talk to their project team or their colleagues about the cool thing that they saw in this other business unit and how they can bring it to this particular context. So,
Yeah. And the other thing is from the inside out, right? Is really beginning to create an innovation culture at RTI where, Shellery, I think I heard you say earlier that anyone can innovate. And setting up culturally inside of RTI the incentives, the accolades around those who do innovate. Can you talk a little bit about how you encourage everyone at RTI to think about innovation and
Sure.
become part of the process? Yeah.
Sure. So one thing that we've really tried to do, well, here recently, I call it our innovation renewal, if you will. So there are a lot of just tailwinds internally that really help tell the message, amplify the message of our innovation strategy. One is that we have an innovation value. Innovation is part of our values, and so our corporate values, our company's values, and so we've really updated that language to reflect kind of the culture that we want around innovation. And also, again, it just amplifies the message, if you will. And so we highlighted innovators like Annice, for example, to share through that values campaign how innovation is a part of her day job. And then the other thing, I'm sorry, I forgot the original question.
Yeah, it was like creating
Okay.
this culture of innovation.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. And
So,
I was even thinking about, like your Rise Awards, right? These are the internal awards at RTI where people are recognized throughout the organization of more than 6,000 employees, right? Of great innovative work and living out those core values.
I will say that is an underutilized method of ours, and that's something that we definitely want to implement more this year. So we kicked off, as you know, our innovation renewal, if you will, through our Ignite Innovation event. And that was really our call to action at the end. We had people commit to specific innovation behaviors that they would take back to their teams. And then at the end of the event, we also encouraged people to share those commitments with their teams and to also recognize innovation. No matter how big or small, recognize innovation through the Rise Award system more formally in their team meetings, again, informally. I feel like that is really how you build culture, the grassroots way. And then also just in the conversations that they're having every day. And so it's really about helping people recognize innovation through our definition and through our storytelling efforts.
Yeah. I remember us talking about been caught innovating, right? That we would catch people in the act of innovating, opportunities big and small. So tell us what's next at RTI. What are you looking forward to in 2025 and on the horizon of the innovation programs that you're working on?
Great question. So much. I will say what I'm looking forward to most is really identifying those focus areas for innovation. So we have, again, no shortage of ideas. We have no shortage of societal problems to solve here at RTI, but really helping the Institute think through what are those problems that we really want to focus on for the next 3 to 5 years, because they're so big and hairy and impactful that we simply cannot shy away from them. And how do we get people to commit resources to solving those problems. So that's one thing that I'm really looking forward to. And the second thing that I'm really looking forward to is engaging our innovators through our design sprint process that we're rolling out and piloting this year. So we've had some early success with those because they allow us to engage diverse teams and diverse subject matter experts, whether it be business development or technical staff. And it just provides a facilitated approach to ideation that we haven't really had more broadly at scale here at RTI. It's not new, it's not a novel approach, if you will, but it is a different way of ideating here at RTI. And so those are the two things that I'm looking forward to this year. And I will say just building on that next year, building the culture more, providing more competency building, capability building, allowing people different formal ways to access trainings to innovation and mindsets.
I'll just add, I think as a staff within RTI, I'm looking forward to all of the things that Shellery and team are building, because I do think the more that innovation is woven into the fabric of the institution at all levels, the more that it becomes a thing that you do every day. So I'm really looking forward to the fertile soil and the infrastructure and the garden that they'll be setting up for those seeds to be planted. I think, like for me personally, obviously AI, there's a lot happening in this space. And, I think irrespective of the, whatever platform or model or whichever company it's going to be, what I find kind of exciting and scary, but at the same time, ripe with just jumping in and trying to figure out the details. It's just the speed at which innovations are going to be happening because technological innovations are driving it. And so, some of the core tenets of like testing and refining, all of the basic tenets of science and a lot of the tenets of, I think, more long-term strategy around innovation development is going to probably get turned upside its head just because of the velocity at which this is going. And there being so many different players now in some of the innovation game around something big like AI technology. So trying to figure out how do we keep pace with that and how do we make that very tangible for our clients in a way that improves the day-to-day of what they do. To me, that's where I find kind of the most excitement and at the same time, some of the biggest challenges. It's not just about the big idea, but how do you bring that big idea down to a point where everyday folks that we serve in the kind of government agency, health agency space, how they make that tangible to improve what they do every day for the larger population.
Right. I mean, and not to mention some of the capacity building work that you do, that you get to share that brilliant knowledge that you all come, the conclusions that you all come to, so that folks and all over the world can use the byproduct of that. Well, I'm going to leave that here for today, but I also have 3 hot seat questions for you that all of our participants, all of our guests answer. So let me ask you this. What is the greatest innovation in human history? What would you say is the greatest innovation of all time?
I'm going to go with the internet.
Yeah, absolutely. Annice, what do you think?
I mean, I would have to say that as well, but I think maybe even more than the internet, I think it's the phone, just because the smartphone devices made the internet technology accessible in a way that it just could not have been until it became a device we all carry around in our pockets.
Yeah. And yet, I know for my kids, one of the most underutilized applications of their mobile device is the phone. Call me is what I want to say to my kids. Call me. So the other is, we're here to dispel the myth of one genius innovator that changes the world, right? There's typically teams, even Edison and, Ford had great folks around them. If you had a chance to join any innovation team in human history, which team would you have wanted to join or maybe currently join?
I'm going to go with Dr. Kizzmekia Corbett, who led the development of the COVID vaccine. So I I think just thinking about a young Black woman, and I was a science major, science nerd my whole life. I definitely am just blown away by how fast we moved and how we constantly pivoted throughout the pandemic. But definitely she is someone who I wouldn't mind being led by on their innovation team.
Yeah. Or as I called it when I first started the podcast, our own collective coronavation that
Yeah.
we were trying to do every single day. Yeah. Anise, what do you think?
I would think, I don't have a name, but I would have to say like some of the very early neuroscientists. I studied neuroscience in undergrad, and I'm just fascinated by how our brains work and the interplay of our brains and our emotions and our physical bodies. We know a lot about computers, the CPUs, and this is the computer that is the operating system for all of us individually, and then it gets networked at a collective level to inform society. And yet there's so much we don't know about the way it works. So, I think there's pioneers who are in the neuroscience who are looking at different new applications and technologies, understanding emotions, it's mental health issues. So I think just any team that's really kind of digging into understanding the mechanics of the brain and the beauty and the complexities of it all would be really fascinating.
I learned an interesting neuroscientific fact today. I don't know if you saw the documentary Free Solo, where the guy who climbs, like the most terrifying El Capitan, right? And the dome. And they did a scan of his brain, and it turns out his amygdala does not produce a fear reaction when climbing. So his ability to climb up the scariest places on the planet without fear and without a net is because he doesn't have the sensation of fear. And I'm like, wow, imagine how that brain is hardwired, right? If you can operate in the world without fear. Amazing.
Wow.
That would be a whole new world.
A whole new world. It's funny because my last guest was all about insurance and risk management. And that is just being able to identify every fear there is. And my last question for you is, what's something that really annoys you or something you wish for the good of all humanity could be innovated for our betterment? So something that's really awful or really terrific that you wish the rest of the world had.
I wish we all had one password for all of these apps
Yeah.
and portals and
Exactly.
websites. I mean, who can remember all of them?
Right. And the cybersecurity that would go with it. Yes.
Yes.
Just be safe. Yes,
Yeah.
please.
The other innovations that need to go alongside it. But first, let's start with that.
Amen. Amen.
Oh, wow, there's so many. Probably like the simplest one I could think of at the top of my head is just a much more integrated healthcare system. I think that's just it. There has to be a better solution. And I think there are models for better solutions, but every time I go to deal with something, it's just top of mind today because I have to connect some other appointments, make sure it's in my chart. And we have developed so many sophisticated things, and yet there's this huge challenge of how we navigate the healthcare that we seek. So
That's right.
would be nice, or one place platform.
Yes. And then we need to get some kind of stress lozenge for when we're done navigating our health system, that we don't suffer the deleterious health effects that come from navigating our health systems. Yes, please.
Right.
Please calm down my adrenals, please, after dealing with my electronic chart. Well, both of you, thank you so much for being on the show today. If people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way to do that?
LinkedIn.
LinkedIn. Fantastic. So we'll make sure to include that in the show notes today. Shellery, Ebron, Annice, Kim, thank you so much for joining me on the show today.
Thank you for
Thank
having
you.
us, Susan.